Hello and welcome to American Friction, the weekly US politics podcast out every Friday. I'm Jacob Jarvis.
I didn't like that. And I'm Chris Jones, who apparently is the guy who loves peas and hates hot sauce.
That's true.
I don't know where either of you got that from last week, but apparently that's me.
You're just a pea and gravy sort of guy. And also with us, here's Nikki. It's Nikki McCann Ramirez. Hi, Nikki. How are you? You're good?
I'm great. I'm great.
Ooh, you sound
good. You sound infused and happy, but it's all right. We're
That's
good.
good.
That. That's
That I
what we're
sound
here
that way.
for. That's what we're here for. You're here for the smarts. We're here for the funsies. Anyway, on this show, we're going to be discussing the Joe Biden pardon scandal and that's just how big of a deal is it. And we'll be looking at the latest Trump world drama and discussing why one of his mates' mums has somehow gotten involved in US politics.
And Nikki and I sat down with New York radio legend Brian Lehrer of WNYC to discuss why Trump did so much better in the Big Apple. Welcome back.
You're listening to
3, 2, 1.
American Friction.
Yes, the election is over, but no, we're not going anywhere. We want to keep giving you the lowdown on US politics as we enter the era of Trump 2.0.
Ooh.
And if you like what we do and you want us to keep going, then why
Yeah.
not back us on Patreon by searching patreon.com/American Friction. There's a link in the show notes. You can get episodes ad-free, bonus content, and ultimately keep us going.
Yeah, that will be ultimate. And in a Black Friday sale, which is still going on, if you sign up for a year, you can get 20% off. Plus, you can give a year or request a year as a gift. Yeah, you get episodes ad-free, you get extra bits, you get all sorts of extra chat from all of us. And you'll keep Chris in peas, you'll keep Nikki in Apple
Kesha.
Music subscriptions and Kesha or whatever else it is she's spending her money on. And you'll keep me in, I'm not sure, really good taste stuff. So decide whatever that might be. Right, let's go on to the discussion in the show. Nikki, Joe Biden is in the spotlight after he pardoned his son Hunter Biden over some dodgy stuff and crimes and all that sort of thing. But it became quite a broad pardon too, of basically anything he's ever done. He's pardoned for it. When he released a statement about this, you posted, honestly, fuck it, nothing matters anyway. Is this really worth the furore which it has caused?
I mean, I think it's worth some light criticism. Biden said he wouldn't pardon Hunter. I think that promise was made with the assumption that Democrats would win the election. And as we know, Hunter Biden has been a target of all sorts of Republican fantasies, conspiracies for years now. And with Trump and a lot of his proposed cabinet outright saying that they're going to prosecute people they don't like, I kind of see where Biden was coming from on this. The thing for me is if we're talking about the abuse of the pardon power, Republicans already don't have a leg to stand on. Trump pardoned people who were involved in alleged crimes involving his own presidential dealings. He pardoned the dad of Jared Kushner and then named him ambassador to France this week. Well, he pardoned him when he was president. He named him ambassador to France this week. What I would like to see is for Biden to take this attitude of, oh, I'm going to give my son a blanket 10-year pardon so Republicans can't come after him, and apply that to a wide spread of issues that affect more people than just his sons. For example, granting widespread clemency to people who have been convicted of marijuana-related offenses, which is something that Democrats in the Senate and House have asked him to do before he leaves office. What I meant by that tweet is if Biden's going to take the attitude of fuck it, I'm a lame duck, I'm out of here in 2 months.
Yeah.
He should just go balls to the wall and start, executive orders, pardons, whatever he can do without needing congressional approval. He should do it. Make Republicans have to deal with it when they come into office. What I want to see is for Democrats to become a little obstructionist with the Republican administration and all their incoming plans, but also for Democrats, as we talked about in the last episode, to start caring more about practical realities and less about norms. And to be clear, this is not me saying yes, presidents should pardon their family members willy-nilly. It's more of a comment on the attitude of things are kind of screwy anyway.
Yeah.
Implement whatever tactics you want.
Yeah, is that the sort of bouncing on from that conversation we had last week as well? Is that Democrats are just so hung up on this sort of convention stuff. What frustrates me almost more about this with Biden is I wish he'd thrown conventions out of the window maybe a bit earlier. Like he should have said to Kamala Harris, like, bury me in piled of shit, slag me off all you like let's break that convention, like, and do that. As we heard discussed that apparently Kamala Harris couldn't break from the president, and even though it objectively would have made her chances better than they were. So yeah, do you think it's a situation where we do have to kind of think not judge him by the same standards as Trump, because obviously Trump's standards are low, but consider the fact that it's like you can't really constantly care about precedent when you are dealing with someone like Trump who doesn't care about them whatsoever. So yeah, you really have to prioritize and pick and choose which ones matter.
And I also think that I agree with what you're saying. The calculation Biden is making now is the calculation they should have been making not just in the last years, but when it became like apparent in his presidency that Joe Biden probably wasn't going to be able to make it through a second term. The reality is that yeah, there's some like Democratic outrage about Biden pardoning his son. It's only been about a week and it's already like maybe tertiary level news. Within a month, I don't think anyone will actually be thinking about it. And that's the kind of thing Democrats need to be doing. They need to be able to want to take that hit of like, okay, maybe it's like a bad news cycle for a week. Maybe we get criticized, but nobody's going to care about this in a month. And if we're able to achieve actual things using that strategy, maybe we should do it more. I think that's the attitude Democrats need to be embodying.
Yeah, sure. I mean, this notion that it really long-tailed trashes the Democratic brand, I just think, well, if you're looking at the presidency particularly, that's a good few years. Joe Biden will be 86 by that point and very much out of the sort of scene when it comes to Democratic politics. I don't think people are going to be going, oh, hey, do you remember when he pardoned his son? That's actually going to completely sway my
Yeah,
vote.
no, the bigger thing in Biden's legacy is gonna be the fact that he continued insisting that he was able to run and essentially denied Democrats a competitive primary where they could have potentially fielded a stronger candidate.
Yeah.
That's gonna be his legacy.
Who is most pissed off about this apart from Trump? And you mentioned some Democrats been angry. Is that kind of quite factional? Are there other Democrats that you would expect to be annoyed at Biden are the ones kicking up the fuss about this, or where's the outrage coming from?
I mean, it's definitely coming very strongly from Republicans who are essentially pointing to this and saying, like, you see, all the crimes were there. He's like giving him a blanket
Yeah.
pardon. We were right. It's like not necessarily with that they were right. The things Hunter Biden was convicted of were like some tax violations
Yeah.
and the unlicensed carrying of a firearm. It had nothing to do with the Ukraine scandal, had nothing to do with all these allegations of corruptions that Republicans insist Hunter Biden is involved in, despite
Mm.
not ever having produced like tangible, concrete evidence. But also, it's a lot of your kind of Nate Silvers of the world. I know like some of the Pod Save America guys were frustrated by the pardon because it makes Biden look like a run-of-the-mill corrupt politician. And to that I say, yeah, most politicians are like that. Like
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't find myself to be angry. Like I know it's a little bit cynical and I know it's probably misplaced, but I can't find myself with the energy to be like really mad and publicly outraged about this pardon when there
Sure.
are so many other awful things on the horizon taking place currently that I think require much more of Democrats' attention than
Sure.
griping about a pardon.
I think also if
Presidents
there's
pardon people for shitty reasons all the time. That's not to say that it's good, but it's like ranked really low on my list of priorities right now.
yeah, it's even ranked massively low on my list of things to be pissed off at Joe Biden about. Like it's
Yeah.
not in there. Strange for Nate Silver to have a bad take though. Chris, how do
Nate
the
Silver's had some pretty bad takes.
Yeah, I was being sarcastic. Chris.
Oh, okay.
Really ruined my joke there, guys. Chris, how does the public feel about this?
Oh, it's a bad joke anyway, so you couldn't ruin
Oh, thanks.
it. Well, you're welcome. YouGov conducted a poll of 3,000 people and the majority of those people that were polled disapproved of his decision to pardon his son. And you can probably guess the political divide around this. Democrats largely approved of this decision, whereas Republicans disapproved. But when you look at independent voters, interestingly, 36% strongly disapproved. And the whole kind of interesting thing around this is that the feeling around pardons, presidential pardons, is really varied. So YouGov found earlier this year that by 51% to 34%, quote, Americans approve of presidents having the power to pardon or commute prison sentences of people convicted of federal crimes. But that is heavily bolstered by Republican support, which is over 60% compared to Democrats, which is under 50% approval for this. And I really wonder why Republicans approve more of pardons.
Have you got any stats on what Jill Stein voters think?
I haven't got any stats on what Jill Stein voters think.
Oh,
no.
well, we can ask Nikki. What do Jill Stein voters think as one of them?
I have no idea. I do know that Trump really aggressively used his pardon power, especially when it came to, granting clemency to people like Roger Stone. He's promised to pardon large swaths, if not all, of the people convicted of offenses related to the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Like, Trump is coming into office, and those are now things that are way more feasible for him to do. So if we're going to talk about abuses of pardon power, you got
to balance it up.
And abuse is bad as it is, but if we're going to weigh it on a scale, like Joe Biden, I want him to do more pardoning of people who actually deserve it.
Well, Chris has actually got his pardon scale here to be able to weigh up the sort of Trump-Biden pardon numbers, don't you?
I do, yeah. I've got my scales right
scale.
on me.
Cool. Yeah. Show me them.
Do you travel with them? Bucket scale?
How dare you? Well, if you look at the data, Jov just did a scale impression there, and it was awful. But if you look at the data, and that's what I've looked at,
very good.
Biden, I didn't call him Barden. Biden pardoned 26 individuals during his tenure.
Okay.
And Trump from 2016 to 2021, 2017 to 2021, pardoned 143, according to Pew Research. But you laugh.
Yeah.
But that's a lot less than a lot of presidents before him. So if you look at Obama, for example, he issued 220 pardons and around 1,700 commutations, which is basically just lessening the sentence rather than a full pardon.
Okay.
Trump only gave out 94 commutations. So again, if you look at the data and the data alone, Trump didn't use his pardoning powers to the extent that many people might think. However, he did issue pardons to some pretty questionable people, and I think that's the crux of it.
Yeah, it was like largely to his mates, whereas Obama's seemed like
I wouldn't pardon
he
you.
might have thought about it. No?
No. I'd pardon Yoda, though.
Yeah, fair enough. I'd pardon both of you
Yoda
if I needed to.
committed no crimes. What are you talking about?
Yoda. By the way, if you're new here, Yoda is Nikki's cat/son.
And he's committed crimes against humanity.
Oh, that's awful.
Oh my God. Get out of here.
Yeah, very good from me. Nikki, you've mentioned the idea of him maybe granting clemency elsewhere or discussing further pardons. Do you actually think there's much chance of that happening, though? And is he going to feel more pressure because he's done this?
I think there is. It's like pretty traditional for a president, like on his last or second to last day in office, they'll just issue a ton of pardons.
Okay.
Like that's kind of just the run of the mill thing because they'll spend typically the last weeks or months after the election, whether they lost as an incumbent or completed a second term and are leaving, hearing pleas for clemency, pleas for pardons, deciding sort of what their last major motions are going to be. It's like kind of seen as one last chance to like get a big headline or, make yourself look better in the public eye. So I do think there will be more pardons. I think the thing that people really are pushing for are pardons and clemency for low-level nonviolent marijuana offenses like possession, that kind of thing. Biden did issue several rounds of commutations and pardons related to this over the course of his presidency. People want more, including me.
I suppose finally then the question is, this is like when I'm going to pin you guys on a question.
Oh, don't
I've
do
not done it
that.
for a little while. Yeah, I know. Should Biden have done this? That's the big question. So I'm going to ask both of your opinions on that. Who wants to go first? Hands up.
I reckon Nikki has got a lot to say about. Well,
Okay.
I guess she kind of has in a way.
Kind of have.
I think I kind of know.
Yeah.
But I'd like to hear it anyway.
No,
I
but
mean, I think my answer is like no, but I don't care that he did.
yeah, fair.
Like, I don't think it was an appropriate a use of the pardon power, but is it incredibly consequential? Is it like precedent setting? No, that precedent was already set with previous presidents who abused the pardon power. And do I think it was an attempt to, in a way, protect his son from further, prosecutorial abuse by incoming administration that has promised to commit widespread prosecutorial abuse? Sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll grant him that. All that can be true and it can still be an inappropriate use of the pardon power.
sure. Chris?
Right. From a paternal perspective, the guy's lost a bunch of his family a long time ago.
Yeah.
He's 82. He doesn't want to spend the rest of his days having to visit Hunter behind bars. And, Hunter, he's not killed anyone.
Mm. Yeah.
The federal crime that he's charged with, as Nikki says, it's not a consequential decision, really.
Yeah.
It's not really going to impact anyone's life, apart from Hunter's and his own. I can see why he's done it, but I think I agree with Nikki that it is it's a bit of a taking advantage of the powers that be in a way.
Yeah, my answer would be that I don't give a fuck that he's done it, and I don't think it's anywhere near as big a deal as Republicans want to make out, and any Democrats that are worried or people who are maybe trying to take just a political take, I would suggest think how many things happen. Think how many things happened over the election campaign that we went, well, that's it. There's going to be nothing else that happens, and it just goes. The news cycle moves on so quick. People aren't going to care about this for a massively long amount of time. But I would say the whole presidential pardon thing to me just seems like bullshit.
So that's very
the one
strange.
thing. It just seems really, really stupid.
I mean, like Ford pardoned Nixon.
Yeah.
Like,
so there's all of our middle of the road takes.
Yeah.
No, but kind of maybe, yeah.
Since 1984, New York State has been solidly Democratic, and in November, it voted that way again. But the margin of victory was by no means a success for the Democratic Party. Trump won 44.3% of the vote, the biggest share the GOP has won since 1988.
joining us today to get into why Trump saw such a surge in his support this election cycle in New York is broadcasting legend Brian Lehrer, who has hosted his own show on WNYC for over 30 years. In that time, he's interviewed some of the biggest names in U.S. politics, including Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and he joins us now on American Friction. Thank you so much for being here, Brian.
So nice of you to have me. Hello from the United States, the capital of the world, however, I will
That's
say,
right.
New York City.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you with us, Brian. I'd like to start with something very, very easy before Nikki comes in with the hard, crushing questions. New York is the place where you've built your career and you've lived. Can you explain to us the political landscape, I guess, of New York and of the state and of the city as well? And why has it been so heavily Democratic for so long?
Well, New York is almost a one-party town. There are hardly any Republicans elected to anything in New York City. Somewhat in New York State, too, in terms of statewide offices. There are certainly many areas of New York State that are more conservative. In fact, most of the counties, I think there are like 64 counties in New York State, and most of them voted for Trump, but most of them don't have that many people. New York City has, around 8 million people. And I think, like a lot of metropolitan areas in the United States and around the world, the politics tend to be liberal, partly because the population is inclusive, and diversity tends left in general. So there is that in New York City, and there is, however, a conservative or at least a moderate streak. When you look at local issues like crime, for example, and then look at who the mayors have been for decades now. Rudy Giuliani, name you probably know over there among
Very much so,
among the
yes.
few Americans you know. Um, he was elected in 1993, and he served 2 terms. Then Michael Bloomberg, who ran as a Republican, beat the Democratic candidate, and he served for 3 terms. And then we had Bill de Blasio, who was more of a progressive for 8 years, starting in 2013, or that election was in 2013. And our current mayor, elected in 2021, is Eric Adams, who's again much more of a centrist, who's even been cozying up to Trump since this election. That's kind of a local politics story. But just to say, New York is generally progressive, definitely on social issues, but it has its moderate to slightly right streak, especially on local issues.
I wasn't going to ask you about Rudy Giuliani, but I think I have to now. I'd like to get your take. What on earth has happened to Rudy Giuliani? Are you shocked as to, the position that he's in today, fighting for his refrigerator, as it were?
Fighting for his refrigerator. But in terms of what happened to Rudy over time, yes, a lot of people who knew him say, there was a sensible center right Rudy Giuliani who then later somehow went crazy. Um, but if you look into his record as mayor, he was very much willing to be a racial polarizer and antagonist. Even during his campaign, one of his campaigns, he was blamed for helping to encourage what became known as a police riot in New York City because he was kind of egging them on at one of his rallies. So he always had a streak, um, but just getting behind this overturning of election and just making stuff up, people didn't expect that. Yes and no. On the one hand, Trump is, to use your analogy from before, was seen as kind of a clown. And so that people are taking him seriously in the first place, of course, this has been going on for 10 years now, practically, um, is a surprise to many. On the other hand, he is very adept at reading and then stoking the populist passions of a certain portion of the American people. And when you look at the last few Republican candidates for president before him, they were kind of moderate, Mitt Romney and John McCain. And guess what? They lost. And so here comes Donald Trump, who's, immigrants are eating your cats and dogs and all of this stuff that's outrageous, factually, and saying that he's really the winner of the 2020 election when they went to court 60 times between all the swing states and some of the federal suits, um, and they could never present any evidence of actual fraud that would overturn the election results. And yet he's out there whipping this up. Yeah, people believe him probably because they feel excluded, they feel alienated. There's been a loss of trust in institutions over time in the United States, which is really on the left and the right. There's a debate in the Democratic Party as to whether Bernie Sanders in any of these elections may have done better against Trump, because he kind of gets, or at least reflects, more than, say, Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton. Of course, Biden won, or even Kamala Harris. How the institutions of American democracy and the American economy have become kind of sold out to the richest few percent, and otherwise seem just not to be responsive to a lot of people's needs. I think inequality is at the root of a lot of it, and so there were a lot of disgruntled people out there, ready to be led in some way, is maybe one way to describe it. And Trump wants to blame immigrants and China. Very good at doing the old, dare I say, fascist trick from the 20th century of gaining power by identifying enemies and hitting them, hitting them, hitting them. Um, but that lack of trust was out there. I think if the Democrats need to do something, it's to really address that and not just defend institutions, which Biden did very much, and Harris did to a similar degree, not just defend institutions, but say what's failing in institutions, but have more sort of pro-social solutions.
Oh, absolutely. And we talk about that a lot on this podcast, about how Democrats need to really put their money where their mouth is. But on a national level, New York Democrats in particular have been historically been one of the most powerful state coalitions in Congress. Obviously, you have Chuck Schumer leading Democrats in the Senate. You have Hakeem Jeffries taking over for Nancy Pelosi. Had Democrats won the House, he probably would have become House Speaker. He is now like the House minority. He will be the House minority leader. For me, there's a lot of very qualified members of the House and the Senate. From your experience, what is it that makes New York Democrats in particular such an influential coalition at the national level? Because I think for a lot of people looking in from the outside, it can sometimes feel like, oh, why is so much of leadership from New York?
Yeah, I don't really have a good answer to that question, except that maybe it is this kind of um, traditional location of the centers of power in New York and
Yeah,
Washington. And then the people who come out of there being so connected to money and power, Wall Street in New York, um, um, all
definitely.
kinds of nonprofits for that matter, the philanthropy sector, um, cultural center, obviously, of the United States in many ways, with respect to the arts and food and all kinds of things. Maybe there's just an aura about New Yorkers that they represent a lot of different things that are central to American life, and they're sophisticated at articulating it, and and they just have this aura of leadership. Maybe that's just a bias to some degree, but also the leaders aren't always from here.
Yeah.
Harry Reid from, where was he from? Not Utah, somewhere out there. Was the
Oh,
Senate Majority Leader
yeah.
for a
And
long
obviously
time.
Nancy Pelosi being from
Nancy
California.
Pelosi, California, but San Francisco, New York, that's kind of similar.
Yeah.
Um, you know, but they're also quality leaders who,
Yeah.
within the context of their party, the Republicans may not consider them quality leaders, but they get the goods. They know how to play the game. They have broad perspectives on things. Hakeem Jeffries has a lot of respect as an up and coming
Hmm.
Democrat, which means he gets shot at from the right and he gets shot at from the left. And he has a lot of relationships with everybody. And maybe that's how you become minority leader and maybe eventually Speaker of the House.
I looked it up. Reid was from Nevada.
Nevada.
Yeah. But that was actually quite good of an answer. You said you didn't have an answer, but I think that's a great answer.
Oh, shit.
Um,
Making it up. It's like,
so to rewind the clock into the 2022 midterms, Republicans haven't won a statewide election in New York in a very long time. But in the 2022 midterms, one could make the argument that Democrats lost the House in large part because of the seats they lost in New York. There was what was considered a bit of a collapse in New York or surrounding like Democratic support. That trend, Democrats hope to reverse this election cycle. It didn't really happen. I'm curious, in your view, what you think is changing in the landscape of New York, the politics that really fomented this change, even just within like the last 2 years.
Yeah, we talk about this on my show a lot.
Hmm.
And I would change the end of that analysis a little bit because they did
Hmm.
regain a number of those congressional seats
Yes, they
in
did.
this election. But I think what happened in 2022, and we should also say that we're not talking about congressional seats in New York City. We're talking about
Yeah.
congressional seats in the suburbs of New York City.
Hmm.
And 2022 was a unique moment in time all over the world. It was really the first election, other than 2020 itself, where the pandemic had been an overlay
Yeah.
on everything, and the world went a little crazy after the pandemic. There was economic upheaval in so many ways that we know. There was more crime in the city. Crime had been going down under the very liberal mayor, Bill de Blasio, we should say, who had ended the Mayor Bloomberg stop and frisk
Yeah.
program, where police were stopping hundreds of thousands of people a year on often, flimsy um, uh, grounds, and then not finding anything. Or they would find, I think one of the reasons, I'm going on a tangent here, but I think one of the reasons that we have so much marijuana legalization in the United States is because there was so much outrage over the number of people who were
Yeah.
getting criminal records, teenagers and other young people who are getting criminal records for low level marijuana busts that were the result of stop and frisk, where the cops may have been looking for guns, but they found a few blunts or something, and then people got caught up in the criminal justice system. Well, there was a lot of backlash to that, and the idea of stop and frisk in New York was to get guns off the street. Um, well, De Blasio ended stop and frisk, and crime continued to go down and down and down until the pandemic. And then there was a surge in crime in New York City. And funny enough, the suburbs had more of a political backlash to it than the
Yeah.
city. Um, and the migrant wave had started as well in 2022. And so you got a lot of people in the burbs who were afraid to come into Manhattan to go to the theater or whatever anymore. And may have also been just like more susceptible to otherizing people. And the Republicans ran heavily on that. There's crime in New York City, and the city isn't doing enough about it. And they won these congressional seats. Well, they didn't, those weren't national issues, those were local issues, but they wound up flipping all these congressional seats. Now, things have returned largely to normal. People will debate legitimately how much back to normal, but things have returned largely back to normal in New York City in those respects, including because the migrants are not as big a problem as, let's say, the Trump campaign would make them out to be.
Yeah.
So the Democrats did flip back, I think, 3 of those 5 seats. So there's probably more than you want to know about that, but I hope that answers your question.
No, I love hearing about it. To me, the way things played out in the House this election cycle is a lot more instructive to me than just how the straight presidential ticket went. I think the House was more indicative of the overall shift we saw in the electorate this cycle. But thank you, and I will pass it back to Chris.
Well, can I say something else about all that?
Yeah, of
I
course.
think one of the underreported stories, even in this country, but definitely
Mhm.
overseas, about this election is how close it really
Yeah.
was. Trump only won the national popular vote, now that almost all the votes have been actually counted, by about 1.5 points.
Yeah.
And even though he won what we call all 7 swing states, if Harris had only gotten 1.8% more votes in the 3 battleground states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, just 1.8% more in each of those states, she would have won the election.
Oh yeah,
So
it was
just to
razor
say,
thin.
this was hardly a landslide, and I think people don't realize that.
Yeah, no, the idea that Trump has like a mandate from God and like a wave of popular support to me is just one of the biggest lies to come out of the analysis of this election.
Well, speaking of lies, and this is something that you've touched on already, Brian, but we heard a massive wave of, I guess, xenophobic rants from Trump and his administration. We heard about Haitian migrants, we heard about Venezuelans, Puerto Rico was thrown in the mix as well. This kind of line of inquiry against immigrants was also carried by Fox News. I think they also recently reported that there are over 60,000 illegal immigrants in New York City. And also last year, Mayor Eric Adams said that he said, we have no more room in this city. So I guess my question is, do you think when you look at the results of this election, those kind of statements against immigrants almost persuaded some people in New York City to vote for Trump rather than Democratic?
Yes, I think some. I think another thing that's been underreported is that Trump's vote only went up by a little in New
Yeah.
York City. And most of what happened was, and this is true in a number of states, cities and states, most of what happened was Harris got fewer votes than Biden had gotten in 2020. And I've got some rough stats on that.
Yeah.
Trump got about 90,000 votes more in New York City itself than he did in 2020, about 90,000 votes more. Harris got 570,000 fewer votes than Biden got in 2020. So there wasn't this massive race to vote for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
But there was this real lack of enthusiasm for Kamala Harris. Now, every state is different. New York being such a Democratic state, as you said before, there was less at stake in terms of who turned out.
Yeah.
A couple of those swing states I mentioned, Wisconsin and Michigan, they saw record turnout this year. And again, it went from just like Biden won by a hair in 2020 and Trump won by a hair this year. But in New York, a lot of it was people stayed home. They weren't inspired enough by Harris. But to the extent that there was a shift to Trump, and to the extent that there was a surprising shift of a few points anyway toward Trump among especially Latino men,
Yeah.
a lot of immigrants are here legally and they don't like crime either. And they feel, according to reporting that we've had on the show from various guests, that Trump isn't talking about me. Trump is talking about bad people, even if they are from the same ethnic group or nationality that I am, national origin. So that was one thing. Another thing was, I've been somewhat critical of the Democratic campaign machine for not leading enough of a sort of counter movement on the economy. The economy was the number one issue. And, if you looked at the polls, even before the election, these low propensity voters, people who don't vote a lot, don't pay attention to the news, don't subscribe to the American Friction podcast.
How dare they?
They were mostly and those people tended not to like either Trump or Harris. But they were concerned about inflation. They were concerned about the cost of living, that's taken place basically all over the world since the pandemic, the increase in prices. And they heard Trump making more of an economic argument. Whereas they heard Harris, I think, making more of an abortion rights argument, an anti-discrimination argument, a Trump might govern like a fascist argument, protect democracy. And she had economic plans too. She's got, frankly, much more well-developed economic plans than Donald Trump does on the main drivers of inflation: housing, the care economy, child care, elder care, healthcare. You know, we did 3 national call-ins on those things in particular because we knew that people were very focused on the cost of living. And, Trump famously in the debate against Harris on TV, when asked if he had a health care plan, which he has promised to have since 2016 to replace the what's called Obamacare. He said, "No, well, I have a concept of a plan." Well, it's
Yeah.
been 8 years. When are you going to have a plan? Harris has a plan, and on these other things. But for whatever reason, the way they campaigned or the things the media chose to cover from the campaigns, it wasn't landing as much. And so whether you're black or Latino or Asian or white or anybody else, the number one issue in most elections in most places that have basic freedoms is going to be the economy.
I want to dig into what you said about like the Democratic campaign machine a little more. I think obviously Republicans, the conservative movement controls all 3 branches of government or will control all 3 branches of government come January. There's about 2 years before the 2026 midterms. What do you think this Democratic campaign machine, the Democratic Party as an institution, needs to readjust in those 2 years to theoretically take advantage of the fact that incumbent parties tend to do worse in the midterms and to potentially take back some of that unilateral control from Republicans when the next election cycle comes around?
Yeah, and that's such a good historical point to mention. I know this came up on one of your other recent podcasts with one of your other guests.
Yeah.
But to put a pin in it, it's so common. Bill Clinton got elected back in 1992 with both houses of Congress for the Democrats as well. He lost Congress in 94. 2 years later, Obama got elected with both houses of Congress in 2008. He lost that in 2010. It happened again to Trump. He won with both houses in 2016. He lost one or both houses in 2018. And then it happened to Biden, 20 and then 22. So chances are it will happen to Trump again. And I see many ways where it could happen with the Democrats not even fixing whatever is broken in their
Yeah.
campaign machine, because if you look at some of what I was just talking about, Trump's somewhat empty promises on fixing inflation, where the only way he says he's going to fix inflation is drill, baby, drill. And, maybe that's going to bring down the price of gasoline, maybe. But there are all these other drivers of inflation that may get worse if he really imposes the tariffs on imports that he's talking about. Or, he may turn out to be sort of an empty suit in this respect. We'll see what the tax cuts that he's planning will do in that respect. They could boost economic growth in the short term. And also on mass deportation. It helped him win the election to some degree, but there was an exit poll from NBC News that asked, should people in the country illegally be allowed to apply for citizenship? And that question won by 14
Yeah.
points. Yes beat no by 14 points. So it's not like people around the country are foaming at the mouth for mass deportation. They do want, I think, across the political spectrum, more or less, they do want people who've been convicted of crimes and are here illegally, especially violent crimes, to be deported, sure. I think they do want the border better sealed. I think it's a legitimate thing to say, okay, let's make sure we have a country with a border, and then we can have a meaningful debate about how much immigration we want to allow. But if we remember the first Trump administration, there was so much backlash by the end. Frankly, I think it's one of the reasons he lost in 2020, to what looked like cruelty. and maybe cruelty for cruelty's sake when they were separating so many families, parents from their children at the border. So now, if they go overboard like that again, and he's really promising a much more aggressive program than he promised in his first term of mass deportation. If they really try to follow through on that, how quickly will a lot of quote middle America turn on him and say, "No, I just can't stand this," and that will help the Democrats take back control of one or both houses of Congress in 2022. Having said that, they they need to show people, I think, that they are leading an economic movement that's really going to address people's long-term concerns with decades of wage stagnation in this country.
Absolutely. Brian, there's so much that we could ask you, and I'm pretty sure we could sit here for hours and talk about US politics, but that's all we've got time for the moment. Brian, thanks so much for joining us on American Friction.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
Right, let's round up some other news.
No.
Right, let's round up some other news stories that you might have missed over the past few days whilst you've been focused on, I don't know, whatever else you've been focused on. So, Nikki, a big one, this new FBI director, well, the person who's been nominated to be the new FBI director, who is he and what's going on with Kash? Kash is a cool name.
Kash Patel, yeah. So, Kash Patel has been tapped by Trump to serve, if he's confirmed as, well, if several things happen beyond a confirmation, as his FBI director. There's a couple layers here. The thing that stands out to me the most is Patel worked in various roles in the previous Trump administration. And this is not the first time Trump has tried to install him in a high level, like law enforcement, national intelligence position. When he tried to do it during his first term, prominent members of the administration, including Bill Barr and CIA Director Gina Haspel, former CIA Director Gina Haspel, threatened to resign. They were like, absolutely not. If you put this man anywhere near the levers of power, we're out. The reason being is that Patel is amongst a pool of diehard Trump loyalists who are unquestioning about doing the president-elect's bidding. Patel stands above and beyond. He is considered pretty much like an outright rogue actor who will do whatever it takes for Trump. And he's done some pretty questionable things during his time in the first Trump administration. The one that stands out the most to me was when he was working at the Department of Defense. The Pentagon was getting ready to conduct a hostage rescue mission in Nigeria. In order to do that, the Pentagon and the State Department needed to get permission from the Nigerian government for SEAL Team 6 to enter Nigerian territory and rescue this hostage. This was set to take place 4 days before the election, and according to intelligence officials, allegedly, Kash Patel lied to the Pentagon about having gotten the authorization from the Nigerian government for the US military to enter Nigeria. So they were getting ready to hit go on the mission when they found out, oh shit, actually we don't have authorization. And what intelligence officials, Pentagon officials have said about this is that A, it endangered the members of the military who were supposed to be on this mission. B, it could have caused an international incident. Because if you enter another country's territory with a military force without their consent and authorization, that could be construed as an act of war. They ended up getting the permission at the last second, rescuing the hostage. But this took place 4 days before the 2020 election, and there's speculation that Patel allegedly did this because he was like, we need to get Trump a big headline before people go to vote. Rescuing a hostage is a big one. So he allegedly went outside of the chain of command and the proper protocol and, almost caused an international incident. It's that kind of thing that makes people nervous about having him in positions in power, because he is promising to use the FBI, whatever government agency he's given, to prosecute Trump's political enemies, including members of the media. He's basically said that he wants to like clear out the Herbert Hoover building in Washington, D.C., which is the headquarters of the FBI, and have all those people there go be cops, which like the FBI are already kind of the federal cops. That's what they
Yeah,
do.
yeah, yeah.
If that's what you think you need to do, you fundamentally don't understand how the agency operates, because every law enforcement agency has an administrative portion. You need people to like assign cases and oversee things. The FBI already has cops, quote unquote. But he's been described, and the Atlantic has a fantastic profile on Kash Patel, where one source says that Trump sees him as the kind of guy you call when you need someone to break into the DNC a la Watergate, but need to keep it like hush hush. That's
Okay.
the kind of guy Kash Patel is. And the the thing here is it may be difficult for him to get confirmed because he has a lot of skeletons in his closet. There are a lot of concerns, even among Republicans, of whether or not he's even qualified to serve in a role like this. So we'll see how it goes. I think first they have to figure out what they're going to do with Hegseth. And after that's all squared away or not squared away, I think the scrutiny is going to fall on either Patel or Tulsi Gabbard.
So on to Pete Hegseth. So this totally unqualified Fox News guy.
Was in the military though.
Oh yeah, cool. That makes him totally just the
guy
for the job, I would say.
Mm.
His mum's got involved now. What is going on with this Ferrari that's happening? That's what I'm saying.
That's a good
now.
word, man.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So we've talked about some of it, but in the last couple of weeks, there's been a ton of reporting on Hegseth's personal and professional misconduct. I think in a previous episode, we discussed the sexual assault allegations
Yeah.
against him. A couple things have happened since then. There have been a lot of reports from various publications interviewing former employees at Fox, obtaining documents from when he worked at two veterans groups, basically alleging that Pete Hegseth has a drinking problem, that he often showed up like smelling of alcohol or, really hungover to work, that he would get drunk at work events and get like really belligerent and cause disturbances. There was one report that came out this week where, while working at an organization called Concerned Veterans for America, he was the director of the organization. The group went on like a rally tour around the United States, and after one event in Ohio, everyone went to a bar, and an employee filed a complaint afterwards because they allegedly witnessed Hegseth chanting "Kill all Muslims" at a bar in Ohio while like very drunk. Among all this, the New York Times obtained an email from Pete Hegseth's mom to him, written in 2017, I believe. And in this email, his mom called him an abuser of women. I can quote some of it for you. She wrote, quote, "You are an abuser of women. That is the ugly truth, and I have no respect for any man that belittles, lies, cheats, sleeps around, and uses women for his own power and ego. Quote, you are that man and have been for years. As your mother, it pains me and embarrasses me to say that, but it's the sad, sad truth. Your abuse over the years to women, parentheses, dishonestly, sleeping around, betrayal, debasing, belittling, needs to be called out." This email went public, and essentially Pete Hegseth's mom is now on a bit of a media tour telling people that like she didn't mean it, that her son is a changed man, that he was going through a really nasty divorce at the time, and she spoke out of emotion. She says that like 2 hours after she sent that email, she sent another email apologizing and quote retracting what she had said. But to me, it reeks of kind of like a last ditch desperate attempt to do damage control over this situation, because it's not like, the way you have to look at it is that it's not just an email from a mom to a son that exists in a vacuum. It's an email that kind of also corroborates all these allegations that he was a sexual abuser, that he fostered an environment of sexual harassment at the organizations he worked at, that, he's had behavioral issues for many, many years. And we're already seeing it scare some senators a bit. Hegseth has been meeting pretty much every day with Republican senators trying to get them on his side. But even now, as we're talking about all these recent reports which came out in the last 2 days, um, some Republican senators are really concerned about someone with these kind of issues heading the military. Because the other thing is that Hegseth, in like the last couple of years, he wrote in his book and he talked in a podcast about with his struggles with alcohol, because according to him, it stemmed from the experience he had when he was deployed in Iraq. He came back, was struggling readjusting to civilian life, and took to drinking. He's now claiming he never had a problem, even though it's like in writing and recorded him saying that he struggled with alcohol. You can't just make these things go away. And I don't know. I think it's going to be a really uphill battle to get a lot of senators to overlook these kinds of things, because not only is he pretty unqualified for the role, he comes with a lot of baggage.
On a wider note, then, Chris, looking at the things that Trump has been up to, he's really been holding court at Mar-a-Lago. He's had people coming and visiting him. He's also planning to go to France to meet with Macron, I believe, and then Elon Musk seems to live with him now. He's
Yeah,
kind of like
can't
his
get rid of him, he
roommate,
says.
which is quite weird. What have we seen from these early interactions with world leaders?
Yeah, well, a lot of it's been very nice at the moment.
And good.
And good, yeah.
Hmm.
And it makes sense, really, because
Yeah.
he's been elected. He is going to be the president. America is, still essentially the strongest nation in the world. Salute to you, right?
Yeah.
World leaders have got to work with him.
Sure.
They have to work with him to make their own, country, I guess, stable in a way and keep ties secure with the US. So he has had meetings, as you say, Narendra Modi, Justin Trudeau, Emmanuel Macron, who, face it, needs a lot of friends right now.
Yeah, sure.
Doesn't need any more enemies. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Isn't like the French government
Mais
maybe
oui.
Yeah, it's the French government is not in good shape.
No.
That's for sure. And then there's obviously
I
Keir.
bet the Brits love to hear that.
I don't know what you're talking about. Anyway, Keir Starmer is also someone who he has spoken to. Keir Starmer is come under fire for basically, some people have said he needs to choose between either the EU and the US, and he said he doesn't need to do that. He can make strong ties with both, including Trump. Interesting to see how he does that with Lamy involved, but we'll see. He's also spoke to Ukrainian PM Volodymyr Zelensky. And Trump, by the way, has also nominated an envoy to Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, who's a former national security advisor. And he's very tigerish, no pun intended.
Okay.
They're great. Do you get it? Frosties.
Kind of.
Sake, I'm wasted here. Anyway, Kellogg told Reuters back in June, he said, we tell the Ukrainians, you've got to come to the table. And if you don't come to the table, support from the United States will dry up. And you tell Putin, he's got to come to the table. And if you don't come to the table, then we'll give Ukrainians everything they need to kill you in the field. So that's...
Yeah.
Ukrainians have been coming to the table, though. Zelensky's in DC like every 3 months.
Yeah, it very much feels like he's just saying things for the point of saying things.
Yeah.
In a way.
To rile up Republicans.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The question is really, though, whether Trump has actually spoken to Putin or not, because Trump's administration, the Washington Post reported that Trump had and said that he'd warned Putin not to escalate the war any further. The Kremlin vehemently denies that. Completely denies that. Says that conversation didn't happen at all. Who'd have thought the Trump administration would lie about something like that?
Yeah, I just think it's also ridiculous how he's just like, I'm going to go and tell Putin, you're
Stop
a bad
it.
guy and you have to stop.
Yeah.
And it's just going to be like, okay, cool, man.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
And then over to the Israel-Hamas war. Netanyahu's camp has spoken with Trump's and Bibi. As he's known, released a statement after Trump's election win, saying, your historic return to the White House offers a new beginning for America and a powerful recommitment to the great alliance between Israel and America. Trump also met with Netanyahu's wife at Mar-a-Lago for dinner recently, where Trump basically suggested that he wanted to, bring closer ties with Israel and also end the war and bring about a ceasefire, which I think he said he could do in one day.
Okay.
He also said that about the Russia and Ukraine war.
Yeah.
You can just do
I don't think
everything.
he can.
No, I would. I know that we've had some pretty middle of the road takes, but I would say
it's a
I
pretty
don't think
spot
you
on
can
take.
do that in the 24 hours on this one. Finally,
Before we move on from conversations that are taking place in Mar-a-Lago, there have been reports that Trump is telling people at his club that if Pete Hegseth's nomination tanks, he's gonna maybe try and appoint Ron DeSantis.
Yes, Meatball.
Yeah. Ron DeSantis.
Meatball Ron.
Get him back.
Oh, that guy.
Poor Ron.
Back in the game.
It'd be good fun to take the piss out of him, though.
What a comeback he
will
have had.
There's an interesting trade-off happening there. Trump appointed or has nominated Marco Rubio for the position of Secretary of State.
Yeah.
He's the senator from Florida, and what happens there is Rubio would have to leave his Senate seat, and DeSantis would have to appoint a replacement. The speculation is that it's been kind of public at this point that Trump wants DeSantis to appoint his daughter-in-law, Laura Trump, to the Senate, and that him floating DeSantis as Hegseth's replacement might be a way to sweeten that deal for good old Ronnie, given that they've been fighting for most of the year.
Good old Ronnie. Anyway, with that brings us to the end of this episode of American Friction. Thank you to Nikki.
Thank you, boys.
Chris, who's on a quest for power of his own. Thank you.
As always, you're welcome, and thank
He's
you,
on a
Joel.
quest for peace.
You're very, very, very welcome. Yeah, world peace. And if you want to help the podcast, what you can do, okay, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to give you some instructions here. If you search American Friction Podcast Patreon, or go to patreon.com/American Friction or go to patreon.com/American Friction directly, you can sign up to support us on Patreon. There's a link in the show notes, and we really want to keep going, but we need your backing to keep the show on the road. You'll be able to get extra bits and all of the episodes ad-free, and help us out. We'll really appreciate it. And a quick reminder, if you enjoy what we're doing, please do go down and rate and review us wherever you're listening to the show. You've been listening to American Friction. We'll see you next week.